Welcome to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm Kay Doran, a shamanic leadership coach and healer, guiding you through life with a foot in both worlds. When you understand the terrain of the inner landscapes, the mental, emotional, spiritual, and energetic, you will become the leader within your physical life, both personally and professionally. After all, the power of change is in your hands. Let's get this journey started. Welcome everyone back to Inner Voice of Knowing. I'm excited by every guest, but we have Kurek Ashley with us today. And what I love about this is it felt like a long shot reaching out to you, Kurek. It was just one of those, it was that knowing. I'd seen you interviewed, I'd known about your book for quite some time and seen you on and off. And I just sent the message. And I think I finished off just by asking and saying, you know, no doesn't hurt and yes sounds great. And it was quite some time later. And it was right at that time where I thought, that's okay. That's all right. Because some people don't respond. And then I woke up. It was after I was in Bali, full moon ceremony in the waterfall and with a group of other divine, beautiful people. And I'd woken up after that and I just checked my phone to see if there was a message from my husband. And there was a beautiful message from you saying, I'd be honoured to be here. So I'm very excited and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. And the funny thing is when people ask or write, I write back. I choose when to write emails back and return phone calls and stuff. I just control my life instead of letting every notification control me. So that's all.
I love that. And there's you know, the first thing for listeners to put down into their notepad and take note of, which is wonderful. But correct, you were from Chicago. You know, you ended up in the movies with some A-listers, and then your life took an amazing turn. Tell us just, you know, briefly about that, because, you know, it really was unexpected. I've listened to the book on audio because that way I can get through some things a bit quicker, and I don't always get through all the books. But with yours, I did. I actually sped it up because it was written in such a way, and of course on audio spoken in your voice, but the story was just so real in how it was communicated, and shocking to a certain degree. One of those moments where you just sit down and it's like, wow, you know, when you find out a story in someone's life and all I've seen is where you seem to be now. And it's like that great divide.
Oh, thank you. I used to be an actor in Hollywood. I did 38 motion pictures. I've worked on 500 movies behind the camera as a key and dolly grip, and you know, assistant to a director for 13 years. And I started at 12 years old, where I lied about my age and got on stage at Second City in Chicago, you know, and moved to LA when I was 18. And took me a few years to get working, you know, to get started. And then finally in 1989, I was hired on Lockup with Sylvester Stallone, which is, you know, not only have I known Sly since I was like 18 years old, but to work in a movie with him is like everything.
Yeah.
Uniquely, though, it's a prison movie. And so I had him shave my hair into a mohawk, and I had two different color eyes and a mustache and goatee. Well, the next movie I was booked for was called Delta Force 2 with Chuck Norris. And I didn't really want to show up in the Philippines with the mohawk and the crazy look. So I kind of shaved my hair down to a military, you know, flat top, and shaved on the sides, and my mustache down to a little military cut, and wound up playing a Delta team member in Delta Force 2. And because I've done so many movies behind the camera, the key grip, you know, I've done is the guy I work with in the States. His name's Mike Graham. He's one of my best friends. Don Marshall, the lighting director, Jeff Brewer, one of the stunt guys. So, you know, you show up, and here we are doing big budget movies now and working with icons and celebrities that we wanted to work with and having the time of our life. And then one tragic day on the set. I was involved in a helicopter crash while we were filming, and five of my friends died, including Mike died in my arms, and Jeff Brewer died, and Don Marshall died, and so I lost five of my friends that day. It was quite. You just don't see it coming. I mean, that's people ask
No.
me, did you get any messages or weird stuff? Because I was on the helicopter, and just as it was hovering about 2 feet off the ground, I just decided to make room for everybody else because the cameraman shifted the camera where you weren't seeing me anymore.
Yeah.
I asked him, he said, no, you're out of frame. So I just stepped out. It doesn't make sense because I would have made an extra $400 that day or that flight. But I had 10 more weeks on the movie. It was just one of those things, end of the day. So I just stepped out, and then a chopper went out over the edge of the mountain that we were on and went about 1,500 feet down and crashed. And I was the first person to get into the helicopter to get people out. And Mike was on fire when I carried him out, and he died in my arms and went to the hospital. So for 2.5 years, I had a gun in my mouth and drugs up my nose. And I
Yeah.
mean, I wasn't partying. I was just trying to kill myself. And thank God I'm not a success at everything in life, because here I still am all these years later. And what used to be known as the worst moment of my life became one of the most transformational.
Yeah. And you'd also made, a pact, hadn't you? Like this blood pact, like kids do. That was the night before this tragic accident, was it?
It was that was like a week before or something.
Yeah.
I think the weekend before. Mike was I was staying in Manila, and then Mike was staying out closer to location. But because of the traffic and everything else, it used to take us like 3 hours to get like 50 miles or the 80 kilometers. It wasn't that far. It was just the traffic and carts and oxen and all the stuff that you're dealing with. And so Mike just stayed in a hotel there, but every weekend he would come to Manila so we could hang out and have fun and the rest of those things. And
Yeah.
so the story you were talking about is that we were in a bar, and some guy starts up with Mike. I'm really protective of my friends, so I get kind of aggressive. Mike, being the funny guy that he is, he calms the guy down. I'm still furious, and without even knowing it, I squeeze a rock glass, like a Scotch glass in my
Yeah.
hands, and it shatters, and I wind up getting a shard of glass stuck in my hand, and so I'm bleeding a little bit. Mike just reaches over because it's just Mike. He was this guy who always had a smile on his face and was always happy. And he reaches over the bar and he grabs the olive fork from the bartender and stabs himself. And he goes, "Let's do blood brothers." And so we did. And I promised him that I would always be there with him, and that I loved him, and that if pardon my language, if this shit ever hits a fan, that will be back to back, and I'll be there with the very end for you.
Not
And
knowing what was about to happen. So you must have been, by your very nature, quite a driven youth. If you were sort of, fibbing about your age and getting into the movies, is that just part of your very nature from childhood, or just?
I guess it was. My mom had always said, out of seven of us that she raised, that I always had this very unique energy. Even as a baby, she knew I was going to do something different and unique.
Yeah.
I don't know if I felt like it was driven in those days. It was more that, my five brothers and my sister never really liked me because I was always known as the weird one. And so, when you have alcoholic mom and stepfather that you're living with, they're very abusive, very violent. It's tough enough being a kid, but then when you're isolated from the rest of your siblings because they don't like you either. So
Yeah.
I had Elvis. I used to listen to Elvis LPs until I scratched them and you couldn't listen to them anymore. I just wear them out.
Yeah.
So, and what I was doing was I was dreaming that if Elvis could make it, I could make it. I could do so. I didn't know what I was going to really do, but I wanted to do something unique. I didn't want a job. I didn't want to do the same thing over and over again in the same location over and over again. I wanted to make my life be unique. I guess this driving force that you talk about is that the biggest fear I have is living an ordinary, unfulfilled life where you just kind of piss it away, not doing something with it.
Yeah.
And so, I was funny. I was a class clown in school. I was, always putting on little performances, but also the other thing is in the hallways, I used to have like little mini seminars about how do you get your goals and dreams and it was always my thing, from again studying people who had the life that I wanted. You saw that they had goals and they went after it. So I
Yeah.
started kind of talking that stuff. And then when I was 12, I decided I wanted to be an actor, even though my dad wanted me to go to university and get a degree and become a lawyer, doctor, or something,
Of course. Yeah.
And yeah. And so my dad was old school. He grew up in a Great Depression. He worked on, big construction sites. He was the big boss running them, but he went up the hard way and worked his way up the ladder. So for him to have something stable was
Mm.
my dad's model of the world, not mine, obviously. And so I told my dad, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I said, it was freezing cold. It's winter. I think we're getting in my dad's van in those days to go somewhere. And I said, hey, Dad, I decided what I want to do with my life. And he goes, oh, great. What's that? And I said, I'm going to be an actor. And the tone of my dad's voice changed immediately. I said, do you think I'll make it? And he said, you got no drive, no talent, no determination. He goes, you're going to be one of the ditch diggers on one of my construction sites. And a lot of people hear that and they want to make my dad a villain. My dad wasn't actually being a bad guy. He wasn't trying to shoot my dreams down. What he was doing was he was trying to steer me clear of an industry that
Yeah.
was laden with problems, drug abuse, unemployment, porn, being taken advantage of, plus California is 2,500 miles away from Chicago. So,
And how many people don't make it and don't get to fulfill
yeah,
the dream? Yeah.
yeah. And they're waiters for the rest of their lives and their lives basically pissed away following some crazy dream. So that's what my dad was trying to do. Yet as soon as my dad said that, I said, okay. And there was a really dear friend of mine, his sister found out about Second City in Chicago, which is where improv comedy started, which is where John Belushi, all the original cast from Saturday Night Live comes from. It's where Saturday Night Live itself kind of comes from because it's improv comedy. They're the originators of it. And she heard about a workshop that they had. And she was talking about being an actress. Well, I instantly followed through on it and went down there. And I don't think she actually ever did, but it was right at that moment that I said that to my dad. And I spent 5 years at Second City. And then when I was finally 18, I told my director that I had something to confess to her. And she said, what do you think? I'm an idiot? She said, no, I didn't know you were the whole time. And I said, why didn't you kick me out? And she said, because you never held anybody back. You have this crazy energy about you. We just had to learn how to focus it because you were like a shotgun. You were all over the place. And a lot of actors didn't like me because if something wasn't funny, I instantly jumped ship and went on a whole nother tangent to get the laughs. But then you're leaving the rest of the cast standing there not knowing where you're going. And it wasn't very professional or polite, but it was my age. And so my director really worked on focusing that energy, which later on has still become a very beneficial thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. I found it fascinating when you said your father didn't see you as, focused and follow through. And yet you've told the story from a very young age of running little mini seminars and, performing. And I always find that when we look back at our childhood, when we peel away, the things that we see were wrong about our childhood, we actually see who we were always meant to be and how we were back as a child. So you've made it into the movies. You've had this horrific accident, 5 friends killed. And as you said, it sort of took you on a pathway of suicide, drugs, alcohol. What was the turning point for you? Because you're now known as like the inspirational, transformational coach and speaker with the book, How Would Love Respond, which I think the title of that is just amazing. But what's that turning point from the depths of despair and darkness, which is where you are when you're on that precipice of so seriously wanting to take your own life, to ending up where you are now.
I had a new thought. It's funny, and it was a kind of a two-leveled thought. One of them is that your life's not your own, and that there's people that love you and look up to you, and you're dragging them down. They're not bringing you up. You're dragging them down.
Yeah.
And I also thought of, so in that I thought about, shooting myself, and my roommate or my flatmate who owned the house that's his house, and he finds my brains all over the wall, and how it ruins his experience. And my mom, and my dad always wondering where they went wrong and how come they didn't see the signs, and them suffering for the rest of their life. So I started seeing all the misery that would ripple effect out of this action.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, this can't be my legacy. In that same thought, though, I realized that God's got a sense of humor. And with my luck, I'll probably shoot myself in the spinal cord, wind up in a wheelchair, and be the only person who lives at 250 years old, because God's going to go, watch this, funny boy, And, uniquely, only a couple of years ago, I was in Melbourne in front of like 4,000 people at the convention center. And I told that story. And later on, I was in the foyer signing autographs and pictures and stuff. And a guy rolls up in his wheelchair and he says, I am your story.
Oh, wow.
I tried to kill myself with a knife, stab myself in the neck, and hit my spinal cord. And I'm in a wheelchair. I've heard from him since then. He now has a girlfriend. He's in sports. He said, I may be in a wheelchair, but I'm living for the rest of my life. I'm learning from my lesson.
Yeah.
But to see that live, like after I said that, there's a person that really almost went through. And that was at that point where I cut a line in my in my backyard in the sand in California, and said, like a samurai warrior with a broom pole. And I said, once I step over this line, I'm done. I'm done. And you really have to get to that place where you go, I'm done. I'm done being fat. I'm done being poor. I'm done being lonely. I'm done being depressed. I'm done being broke.
Yeah.
I'm done. Because until we get to that place, we're really complacent. We accept it. It's okay. And so I drew the line. I stepped over it. I gave up cocaine. I gave up alcohol abuse. I gave up cigarettes. I gave all my guns away. Not that just people wandering down the street. I gave them away to gun collecting friends of mine.
Yeah.
And literally, it was that decision point. So decisions where all change happens, and then you got to be committed to the decision. So every day you have to keep reaffirming that commitment until you get so far away from it that the new way of operating becomes your habit or your pattern.
Yeah.
And that my life is a testament of that day of decision.
Daily choices moment to moment. And you'd had visitations from Mike. Did experiencing that have any influence on you coming out the other side as well? Because you suddenly realize there is something after this.
Well, I wasn't just seeing him. I mean, as you read in How Love Respond.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not the only person who saw him. I just saw him the most.
Yeah.
And, it was like...
Well, you spoke to him as well. He spoke to you, communicated with you.
Yes, and he wasn't very pleased with me that here his life was gone, and yet here I'm toying with mine. And he was very stern about that I need to get my act together, and that I had promised him to help him. I thought that meant that I carried him out of the wreck, and I tried to save his life, and I brought him back to life 4 times, but the 5th time I couldn't bring him back. I thought that was it. But what he really wanted to do is he wanted to spend time with his fiancée and say goodbye. And it took me a while, literally 2 years to figure out how to do that. And then finally, when it came across my consciousness how to do it, I told him to go visit her in her dreams.
Yeah.
And so the next morning, I got a call from her at 6 a.m. saying that Mike spent the whole night with her and sat in the end of bed and said that I had sent him and that, they said everything they needed to say and said goodbye. So, but it was very interesting. And then I had to learn how to do an out-of-body experience and kind of escort him in. Well, not kind of, I escorted him into the light. So, yes, it gave me a real knowing about that there's more.
Correct. Had you had any previous beliefs or alignments with what
No,
people call the
I'm
spiritual.
a Chicago street kid. That was as far away from.
Yeah.
Well, at first, I just thought I was going insane because I thought I was like one of those people walking down the street talking to strangers that aren't there, and now I'm that guy. But it was so real that you just kind of need to deal with it. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
going away. The first time I just thought it was complete insanity and I was out of my off my rocker. But then as it kept happening, and then there was other things that um, you know, made me know that this is either I'm really deeply out of my mind or whatever, but I'm just going with it. And then it changed because instead of mourning the loss of my five friends and that feeling of helplessness that you couldn't do anything to save them,
Mm.
turned into that now I'm going to honor their passing and honor their lives by making my life amazing, and helping change people's lives around the world in honor of them for what they gave up. And I know if I could ask them today, let your life stand, but all the transformation goes away, or let the transformation stand and yet you let your death stand. They'd all say, I wanted my life to count and mean something. Let my death stand. And so I feel very honored and privileged that I've been able to do that for the last, well, was it over 30 years now? So
It's powerful to be able to reframe and move into a higher perspective of looking at life, and it completely changes it. So what I found fascinating too with your book is, did you take a pathway of learning and being mentored, etc., from others? And if you did, I still also see very much of your own unique way of communicating what you're teaching and what you're sharing and writing and speaking about.
I still to this day have lots of mentors. I mean, the thing
Yeah,
is, if you're gonna, be one of the leading coaches on the planet, well, you should have coaches. I mean, that doesn't make sense. You tell everybody else to get coaching, but you don't get coaching or get help.
absolutely. Yeah,
I spent 5 years on the road with Anthony Robbins. I had really close contact and mentoring personally with Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and
yeah.
all the library of books that I have, audio programs, live web workshops that I've been to. I mean, I even went to uh, asked with Werner Erhard, which was right up there with a cult in those days. I mean, it was so intense, but that later became the Landmark Forum. Werner was a pioneer at what he did,
Yeah.
and what he taught. Marshall Thurber's Money and You. I mean, there's all kinds of different, and still to this day, I'm always studying. I'm always learning. I still go to workshops. People see me there and they go, "You're Kurek Ashley," and I go, "I'm down." And they go, "What
I
are you
love
doing
that.
here? Guest speaker?" And I go, "No, I'm a participant."
I
They
love
go,
that.
they go, "Well, how do you think I got to where I am in life? You got to keep evolving, otherwise you're dissolving." Wayne Dyer was very instrumental in changing my whole mindset around wealth and money, which kind of a weird source. So I would have first thought.
Yeah.
But I was, first starting to sell out audiences, and I was at one of his programs, and he walks up to me and starts acknowledging me for everything I'm doing and my reputation, and what a strong speaker I am and how I'm moving audiences. And he says, "Where'd you come up with this crap though that you're the spiritual guy, not the money making guy?" And
Ah,
it had me dead to rights, because I did say that regularly. And he goes, "Where'd you get that crap?" And I said, "Well, I am." And he said, "But where'd you get it?" And he goes, "Don't say the Bible. You've never read it, and I have." And I said, "Well," he kind of got me there. And he said, "You were about to say money's the root of all evil." And
uh-huh.
yeah. And he goes, "That's not even the quote. The quote is the love of money, the obsession of it, the greed." He said, "Money's not the root of all evil. Poverty is." And he really got in my face. And I said, "Sir, I believe they're introducing you on stage right now." And he says, "What are they going to do? Start without me?" And he stayed right there with me and stayed on me until he started changing my mindset. And then I saw Wayne again here in Brisbane, and he saw me standing in the back a little bit. And he called me over and he goes, "Believe you've changed that mindset, Kurek." I go, "Yes, sir. Thank you."
Oh,
And
I
he
love
goes,
it. I love Wayne Dyer. What a fabulous
"Yeah, great
story.
man. Great man."
Fabulous story. But you do, because, you read so many books or you listen to speakers and it almost sounds like it could be the same person.
Hmm.
Whereas your language is very different. There was one that, particularly chapter 8, the power is in your house. And I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. I love the way, because I love it when people bring their own dialogue and imagery so people can really connect and relate to it. So tell us a little bit about the chapter, The Power is in Your House, because I really loved it.
It's funny is I have these things that somebody actually created a website called Kurekisms, and there are
Yeah.
these little, I don't know, my unique way of saying things and my kind of coined phrases and the power in the house. It's just, I used to even say it when I worked out in the 80s, in the gym, powers in the house, which means inside here in your house, your powers. And that Buddha talked about it and Jesus talks about it, is that, you can't look for things outside of yourself to make you feel great. It doesn't exist. There's no goal that would make you feel great. Even though most people are chasing goals, saying that it's going to give me a feeling, which it can't. If you look at Charlie Sheen as an example, well, the guy's making $2 million a week. He's got a hit TV show. He's famous. He's got all the, house, cars, everything he wants. And yet he's doing big bags of cocaine and has porn stars living with him. And then, of course, here he's on the internet talking about it, all of it, until child services comes in and takes your kids because you're waving big bags of cocaine and you're
Yeah.
with porn stars in your house. Well, what, nobody else is watching? Well, that doesn't make sense if the goal or goals would make you happy, because that guy, by all means, should be really happy, but he obviously wasn't. So to look inside yourself for happiness, by the way, happiness is the decision. Buddha said that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing you can do will achieve happiness. So it's always in here. And if you think about looking in 365 degrees spherical in any direction from where you are, well, that would be infinity. So that means you're the center of your universe, and everything that happens in your universe then would be a ripple effect of what you're sending out is going to come back, because that's the law of circulation. So it's all going to emulate from here. And so the first person that I need to take care of before I serve anybody else would be me.
Yeah.
People think it's selfish. Well, self-love and selfish is kind of different. Selfish is about doing it only for yourself, but self-love is about doing it for yourself, because knowing that whatever you're filled with, you're going to spread to everybody and everything around you. So if you're filled with misery and scarcity and anxiety and pissed off and all that stuff, well, we all know, we see people spreading that.
Yeah.
And then if you're filled with happiness and love and abundance, you just spread it wherever you go naturally. It's just a way of operating, because that's what you're filled with. So I think that to remind ourselves, the first person I got to work on every morning is me, and fill up my tank. Don't assume just because I went to bed feeling good last night that my tank is still filled in the morning. Fill it back up, do your affirmations, read your goals, do some exercise, do some meditation, all that stuff. Make sure your tank's filled up, so that when you walk out into the world, you don't have like this empty tank for people to throw their garbage in. Number
Yeah.
one. Two is, stuff doesn't bother you the same way when your tank's filled. But also, there's no room for other people's drama and garbage when your tank's filled. And then you're just spreading it everywhere you go. And that's just, my mantra when I meditate every morning is, how may I serve?
I love that. I love that. I give myself every year a year-long intention that I choose to sort of anchor myself to. And a couple of years ago, and then I feel that I integrate that so it stays with me for the next year when I bring in a new focus and intention and alignment. And a few years ago, it was joy, regardless of external circumstances. And every time there were challenges and I felt myself getting caught, I just place my hand on my chest and I just sort of breathe, I am here now. I hold it for 4. I breathe those words out. And instantly there would be joy returned because I'd just be present in that moment. You know, I find that when we're outside of that, we're trapped by the past or harpooning ourselves into fearful futures. And, you know, it was that living demonstration for me that I can have joy regardless of what's going on externally, and that my happiness should not be determined by challenges in life, because there are always going to be challenges in life. And gosh, you've certainly had yours. You've talked about your childhood, you know, you've talked about the, look, five friends and colleagues, and your best friend. But when we had a quick chat, just to connect, you said about wait till you get to the last chapter. So I made a commitment. I'm going to get to that last chapter before we chat. And I did. It was in the early hours of this morning, because I sometimes wake up very early and it's like, okay, I'm going to get to that chapter and listen to where I've got to catch up and get to that chapter. And I loved it because it was so authentic, that story, when and clearly an incredibly challenging moment for you, and people could go, what shit timing. And I have a saying that shit will either stink up a place or will fertilize our inner garden. And I'd say, Kurek, that, you know, when I got to the end of the chapter, you used it to fertilize your inner garden. But I love it because it also demonstrates that even when you think everything's going your way, we all have that moment of feeling completely sideswiped. And, you know, it was recommended that you don't write that and alter the whole book. And I'd love you to speak into a little bit about the power of why you chose to leave it in there, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, you know, when you're the guy on stage, you know, I mean, I've been in front of over 1 million people. Plus being in the movies on top of it.
Yeah.
People somehow think like you're, I don't know, you got a special chromosome or a 13th zodiac sign, like you're different. And they start buying into a perception that everything works out for the guy on stage, everything he touches, you know, because I've helped the women's beach volleyball team to win gold medals at the Olympics, world record holder for firewalking, being in the movies, best-selling author. So people just think everything I touch turns to gold.
Yeah.
Which is nothing farther from the truth. And so I'm writing this, and as I'm getting closer to the end of the book, I asked myself for 2 things. I said, number one is I want to have a better connection with people so they understand I'm a real guy. Life still happens.
Yeah.
You know, just because I was in a helicopter crash doesn't mean I get the get out of jail free card for the rest of my life. That's not the way it works. Also is that I wanted a better ending because I didn't know how to end a book. The book is so powerful and so strong. And, you know, even my agent was like loving it, couldn't wait for it to come out. I just couldn't figure out how to wrap it up without it sounding fluffy, like, okay, now you can have anything you want in your life. And that's not the message I want to send.
Yeah.
You know, and so, well, I got both. So be careful what you ask for. And it rarely comes in a package you thought it was supposed to show up in. Well, you know, during the writing of the book, I had another major catastrophe hit my life. First thing you want to do is throw the whole book away and show this person that, you know, I'm involved at that point. You hurt me, you destroyed my life. So now you're like hurting yourself, thinking the other person somehow is going to respond to that. And it just makes you look like a nutcase. And I realized that this is that ending. That it shows I'm a real guy, that the doo-doo still hits the fan, like, you know, like,
yeah,
here's some timing. So write it in real time so that people can go, whoa, didn't see that one coming, but then see how I deal with it. So there's been other times in my life that, you know, because I have my son who's now 12, but throughout our life, you know, other things that have gone on, a wife leaving me and the rest of those things, and he sees me down and out. And I go, now, buddy, watch what I do with it. how I do it and how quickly I turn this around.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't ask for a better real life example for you as you're growing up to see this happens. Now, what am I going to do with it? And so that's what the chapter was. And the publishers, didn't like it. But that's why I had a clause in my contract that I have final approval of the entire book, that I have final cut. And they didn't like that either. And I go, but that's why I had to put in the contract. And so it's one of those chapters that when people read the book, man, the book itself is life-changing for them. But then they get the last chapter and they go, man, if that didn't sell the entire book, because here's an author finally telling the truth, that stuff still happens, and yet he's using what's in his book to turn his life around even one more time. So I couldn't have asked for a better
chills
scenario.
washing all over me. And and it was so powerful and is so powerful. And I recommend to every listener to either get the audiobook or get your hands on the copy, because I'm very fussy about books and things that I read. And this one I did wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
Absolutely loved. I'm known for K-isms, so I can really relate to what you were saying about that. But the ending was so powerful. You can read a lot of books from people, and it can tend to create for readers or, anyone listening to them, if they're speaking, etc., that, well, they ride on the crest of the wave, and waiting for some sort of perfect life where everything seems to be going exactly their way. And that's just not life. And I think the way the book ended really demonstrated that it is a choice, and the fact that you shared the initial shock and emotion and devastation of it, and then all the way through, you're talking about questions, and I call them power questions because they invoke a response. And I love that you're asking yourself the very things that you're asking other people to apply their lives, and it works. And it's a beautiful demonstration of the power of that, and the power of the application of everything that you're sharing in the book, and demonstrating how it works for you, and that it doesn't matter how long we've been doing this. We all get sideswiped at times. We all have incredible challenges happen, and it's the human condition. And one of my tagline, for a lack of a better word, is, the power of change is in your hands. And it really is. And it's determined on that choice that you make. So thank you so much for holding firm, because it was truly powerful. And I don't say things just to blow smoke up people. This is how I really felt about the book, and just went, wow, and so authentic.
Well, the publishers wanted to change the title and cut out the first 5 chapters as well. And I said, not going to happen. I said, first, the title wrote the book, so that has to stand. And they said, but books titles aren't a question. No books are. And I said, like, Who Stole My Cheese? That one. And they're like, well, that's an exception. I go, well, so is mine. And they'll say, well, we don't like the first 5 chapters. And I go, well, that's okay, but then don't read the book. I said, but that's the way the book's coming out.
Yeah, the energy and the words in the title, for me, How Would Love Respond, invokes, and it's already been happening for me. And I'll look at things like that, but I'm also hearing myself say, well, how would love respond? Like, it just becomes an integrated question that just comes up.
Thank you. That's exactly right, is to explain the power of that question. Then how do you use that question? That's what the whole book is really about, except for I take you on a journey, because otherwise, if I just said it, it's not really layered in there at the level that you need to get it at, the power of that question. Just like what's great about this, one of my other questions that I use regularly, because the reason that we do personal development or personal growth is, number one, yes, have a better quality of life. Absolutely. And have more goals achieved and all that stuff. Great. But it's also is, if you think life's not going to knock you down and kick you a few times, That's probably not accurate. So it gives us that fortitude to be able to brush ourselves off, pick ourselves up as fast as possible, and get back on track. Because when you're like 85, 90 years old and you look over your life, all those things that kept us down longer and we bought into and the drama and all that stuff of it, you'd be saying, why? Why didn't I just pick myself up and go for it? Because now as I look back, that stuff really wasn't even that big of a deal that I was keeping myself down for. The purpose of our life is to enjoy it. That's your purpose. It's not any more grandiose than that. It's not, I'm
Yeah.
here to save the world. That may be your mission, but your purpose is to enjoy it. And if you do that, like we said about earlier, well, whatever you're filled with, you're going to be spreading to everybody. So that's quite
Yeah.
spiritual that you're helping everybody else have a joyful life. But also is you'll look back and you go, I won. That's what this was about, and I won. If not, you're gonna look back and go, what was I thinking? Like I get so caught up in petty stuff that has no value, but I wasted all those years of youth and life on stuff that had no value and
Yeah.
people that had no value, not insulting the people. The thing is that if people aren't helping you live a happy, fulfilled life going towards your goals and dreams, well, you're going to wind up resenting having them in your life after a while, anyways, because you allowed them to take you off your path of you living the fulfilled life. So, two miserable people never creates happiness. So, I allow people to have misery by themselves if that's what they want to do. If they want to help out of it, sure. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't. They just want to get you stuck in their drama glue where they're stuck in their story and then we're stuck listening to it.
Ooh, powerful. Really powerful. So the podcast, Kurek, is called Inner Voice of Knowing. How do you feel your inner voice of knowing has played out for you? Or do you feel that you have that inner voice of knowing at times?
Oh, I live on that voice. I make
Mhm.
all my decisions off of feeling. So
Yeah.
we need to think to create, we need to feel to decide. So think creative thinking, right? So when you have IVE on the end of a word, that produces the result that comes before the IVE. So effective actions are actions that actually produce the result or the effect. Creative thinking are thoughts that create, right? Well,
Yeah.
your spirit is your inner voice. That's you. That's your spirit talking to you. It never steers you wrong. Anytime we've gone against that voice is when we slap ourselves in the forehead going, what was I thinking? Why didn't I just listen to myself? Because you knew better. And
Yeah.
yet we conscious mind talked ourselves past it. So, um, there's people that I've done business with in the past that, early on, you're already seeing the signs, but you get caught up in how much money you can make and the deal, and it sounds all good. You're talking past your feeling
Yeah.
and you pay the price every single time. So now it's all about feeling. I just ask myself, how do I feel about this? If I don't, like when you asked me to be on your podcast, I feel the answer. If you notice, I didn't ask you how many subscribers you have or how long you've been
I
doing
was going to
it.
mention that because not everybody has, but there are the people that, that ask that first. And I've been on lots of podcasts, but again, I've gone on that feeling and,
Yeah, I go on the feeling. And if I needed some work done on my website and I got on Fiverr and I uh, contacted a woman who has high reviews and knows my
yeah,
platform. She's in Brazil. We get on a Zoom call and she says, Kirk, um, there's things that happen in life that you never think would happen that happen. And she goes, this is one of those moments because I was in a very dark place in my life and it was your content that changed my life.
yeah,
She's in Brazil.
yeah,
And I said, ma'am, I believe you're the right person to work on my website. See,
beautiful.
because I just feel it. And not only that is she knows me. She knows what I'm about. And then she started literally rattling off things that I talk about specifically, including, like you say, some of my Kurekisms.
Yeah,
And so I know she is. It's a feel because, and sure enough, the more closer we are towards working on things, the more I know. See, that's absolutely right. Yet earlier in the year and late last year, there was a guy in the States has a new shoe kind of thing. I was going to work with him, take his shoe to be $1 billion business. And right off the bat, you start feeling things, like
yeah,
can't keep his word, that stuff doesn't add up. Judge Judy always says, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense, right? So as soon as you start to notice it doesn't make sense, don't try to get it to make sense. It doesn't. And I go, okay, now I'm just going to let this play out, but I'm not walking on the path anymore. And sure enough, this guy has shot himself in the leg more times doing stuff that it plays itself out. And you go, see, I listened to myself, and there it was again.
Yeah.
Just learn to listen to your inner voice, so that should be your number one advisor, because it is you. It would never steer you wrong. It has access to the internal intelligence or the universal intelligence.
Yeah.
It knows everything. It's connected to the oneness.
I love that. Love, love, love that. Correct. I could sit here and talk to you for hours. And, I thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
I thank you for
Anytime you want me back.
Sorry?
Anytime you want me back.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so many gems there. And I thank you for your authenticity.
Thank you.
And for your 2 feet on the ground, and I mean that in terms of, a lot of people can elevate themselves. And I think there's a way that you put it in the book. I can't remember quite the quote, but it's basically about, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but the subscribers that I have or don't have don't change the gift or the power of the message that I might have.
That's correct.
So how was it that you worded that in the book?
Oh, I don't know specifically how worded in the book.
Something about masterful or something.
Yeah, the thing is that a master is not judged by the size of his crowds.
Yes,
and that's from Illusions by Richard Bach, one of my favorite books. He wrote Jonathan Livingston
I've just
Seagull.
finished reading that. I read it in my 20s, and I just finished reading it.
It's one of my matter of fact, a friend of mine in LA, he's a very famous writer, Hollywood writer. He just got hired to write Illusions as a movie script.
Oh, fantastic.
So
yeah,
maybe I'll go back to Hollywood and start playing Donald Shimoda. But
that'd be wonderful, actually.
The part of it, though, is to understand is whether people believe me or not about what happened with Mike or anything else. That doesn't change what I experienced. And I was really tentative about sharing it with people because it's a very personal part of my life. I didn't want to be looked upon as a nutcase or making stuff up or whatever. It was actually my first wife who said, "Kurek, you have to let people know where you get your wisdom because it's profound." And she really pleaded with me to put that in there. And then I felt, again, there's that answer. I felt she was right. And now I knew I had to do it. Well, if you listen to the audio, even the sound engineer had to take a break. He was crying as I'm doing, the first 5 chapters. Yeah. I ruined more keyboards typing that. It took me 4 years to write the book with snot, tears. And she would come in and she goes, "You okay?" I go, "No, I have to stay in this because that's what I want people to feel. I want them to feel the realism of where I am and the smells and the sweat running down my back and all those things that I was experiencing, because that's different than reading it. I wanted you to feel it. And that's how would love respond.
And that's how people will respond with the book. And that, to me, is such a key part of the story. You can't take it out. And at the end of the day, who cares what they think? They're going to be feeling the whole process. And I went through that because of my shamanic background. Boy, there are some stories there that I used to say, I'll write a book and I'll share them when I'm an old lady. I must be old enough now because even my coaches have been saying, "Kay, but this is what's brought you here." And I think it's how we stand in it and how we communicate it, and how we bring the feeling and the connection and the threads woven into it is determined by how people receive it. So.
And if they don't, you got to be free of the good opinion of other people. Is that anybody who's ever created something new or different or whatever, well, obviously they didn't think like the masses. They didn't act like the masses, and they produce what the masses don't. So it's the minority. We think differently, we act differently, but we change the world when the majority waits for it to be changed.
Mhm.
So you have to go up against the slings and arrows of people saying all kinds of stuff. I don't really care. By the way, if nobody say anything about me, I'm probably not doing anything. So I'm kind of like a reverse paranoid that I think people are talking about me and I actually like it.
I hear you there. I hear you there. Thank you so much for your time. And now that you've thrown out that invitation, I will be inviting you back, Kurek. Thank you so much. I really
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Join me on my next episode. And if you love this podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the plus button if you're on Apple, or like and follow on Spotify, rate and review, and please share Inner Voice of Knowing with your friends.